All right, welcome back to another episode of 2 Hours No Traffic, a Philadelphia and New York sports podcast. I am Philly Brandon. Spen Harris is out tonight with a migraine, but we don't need him. We have Kyle Scott, the founder of Philadelphia sports media giant Crossing Broad and co-host of the Monetized Media HQ podcast. Kyle, thanks for taking the time to pop on.
Brandon, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Sorry to hear about your co-host migraine. I get them a lot, and I can certainly sympathize.
Yeah, he's going to try and listen tomorrow once it unclouds a little bit, but we'll get back with him next week. Really, the reason that this whole interview happened was you posted a really interesting thread about how Crossing Broad kind of came to be. And it was kind of a little bit about small business, a little bit about Philly sports, and then a lot just to kind of about your personal journey through building the brand. And the more I read through it, a lot of people read the first 2 or 3 tweets and then just kind of faded off towards the end. And I really thought the whole story was really, really important. So I wanted to give you the chance today, while we're on the podcast, just to kind of talk through, the early stages from almost failing to then, not to spoil the ending, but, going big with a big public IPO and, the big check over from the UK. So I'll kind of turn it over to you just to kind of talk about how it came to be.
Yeah, sure. That was really the first time I've but the first time I really spent time crafting a Twitter thread. I've been on Twitter since 2009, and I've seen over the last few years the threads just take over. And I've always used this, not the regular Twitter app, this client called Tweetbot, and it doesn't make threads as easy. So, but I was thinking, and I was like, hey, we're doing this new podcast, and we're trying to talk to creators who are in the weeds and trying to do it. And I was like, this is a pretty good story. And, sometimes I don't always want to put myself out there, particularly about how the business and certainly the revenue side of it. I always kind of kept that quiet. People over the years asked me how does Crossing Broad do? Do you make a living? Things like that. And the answer was yes. And then some years were much better than others. And then some years were really bad. And then some years were really good. And I always kind of kept that close to the best. So I put out this thread, and it was basically just, hey, I started this site. It was, kind of steadily grown and going well for a period of 5 to 7 years. And then we lost one of our major advertising methods, which was this Google platform we were using. It was called Google Surveys. So people would have to answer a survey question to read the site, and it paid really good money. And they just basically turned that off overnight. And then I was like, oh my God, we have someone working for us. I have a wife and kids. My wife had left her job at that point. It's man, what do you do? So I can go through the story more as we go on, but basically the thread is about, hey, the next few years, trying to piece together things that work, getting a little bit lucky when the Eagles won the Super Bowl that we sold a lot of t-shirts and had really good income from that. And then sports betting gets legalized, and kind of right place, right time thing. Pennsylvania and New Jersey happened to be the first 2 states that really were kind of set to legalize online betting. And I was like, oh my God, I know how much these companies are going to pay to get new customers. I had a background in affiliate marketing. I knew those, the rates for new customers were going to be astronomical. I was like, wow, if we do this right, this could be turned into a real business. And that's kind of what I spent the last 3 to 4 years doing. And then obviously it worked out really well. We got acquired at the end of 2020. And, we're still with that company now, continuing to grow it.
Yeah, that was the part where I thought the story got extra interesting because, the few tweets before that were, the Band-Aids and then getting lucky with a couple of writers who gave you enough money to kind of get by for a little while. But then just kind of, just keep bandaging things together until, the sports betting came along, and really was the first time, I guess the sports betting and the Eagles Super Bowl is really the first time you had some sort of stable footing to stand on to where you could start growing instead of just surviving. And we actually had the pleasure of having one of your earlier writers come on the show. Russ Joy was one of my favorite interviews so far, just as far as a true Philly guy just to kind of talk to. It's probably the longest hockey episode we've done yet. You don't talk a lot of hockey on this podcast. That moment, and it was so crucial to get the right guys early on. What were you looking for in those first couple writers to start growing this blog out?
Yeah, it's really good question. So funny story about Russ. I put in the thread that there was a month where I paid him instead of my mortgage, which was true. It was hey, Russ is hey, you owe me for 3 months. And I was well, Russ is one of our guys, and we know this is going to go well. So, I think that sort of thing speaks to anyone who runs a business where, there's times you just got to make a hard decision and kind of take a leap of faith and double down. So, but Russ is one of our most important guys, and he's got a really interesting story. He was a teacher. And in 2017, I had wanted to start this podcast. I wanted to do a morning show 3 times a week, 6 a.m. It was kind of a heavy lift. And I put out a tweet looking for people. And I got responses from a bunch. And then Russ was someone who had no real formal background in sports, but he sent a sample audio tape. And I was like, this guy sounds good. He's eager. He was half the battle was being committed to getting up at 6 a.m. and doing this. And he said, hey, I can get this in before I go off to school and work and all that. And then the other guy who hit us up was Adam Lefko, who's, now pretty big at TNT. And at the time he was, he was with Bleacher Report. He wasn't as known as he is now, but he was certainly known. And I was like, well, this is great. He can kind of he's got more of the broadcasting chops than we do. Russ brings the fan opinion, and I'm somewhere in the middle running this blog. So that's how I got to know Russ. We started doing that for a while. And then it turned out Russ was also a great blogger. And I was like, dude, you can write for the site too, and we'll pay you on the side to do that. And then he was really good at writing some of this betting content that was important for the business. So I was like, hey man, I can pay you more to do this because this is making money. And, eventually last year we finally hired him full time, even though he'd been heavy freelance for about 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 years before that. But bringing on all those writers. So back in 2017, we got an investment from 2 local guys, Mike Iredell and Jeff Wool, who were tagged in that thread. One of them's a cardiologist. One of them's a local business owner. They were fans of the site. I think at some point I had mentioned that hey, wink, wink, I'm kind of looking for investors. And both of those guys were like, yeah, we like the site. What do you need? And we had this plan. It was at the time where subscriptions were starting to get big. The Athletic was getting some traction. And we're like, we're going to go hire some marquee Philly names. And I had reached out to, enough time's gone by here, but I reached out to Jimmy Kempski. I had reached out to, I'm trying to think here, Charlie O'Connor, who covers the Flyers, Derek Bodner. I mean, we tried everybody who's who of Philly Twitter. We're like, we're going to see if we could pay these guys, give everybody a little bit of stake, and then create basically what became the Philly version of Athletic. And all of those guys said no for one reason or another, and I appreciate it. Jimmy has got a really good gig with Philly Voice. Derek Bodner was going to the Athletic, right? So these guys, the train had kind of already left the station, and we're like, well, man, that would have worked because we would have got all these people with really big followings, and they knew they were talented, and a lot of them felt they didn't fit the voice of Crossing Broad, which was more gossipy, and those are more in the weeds guys. So we're like, screw it. We're going to go find really eager people, kind of put together the Bad News Bears of blogging, not necessarily people that have a ton of experience. So we brought in Russ. We brought in Bob Wankel, who had long time ago written a little for Barstool, but he was a teacher, and now he's an unbelievable Phillies guy. We brought in Anthony Sanfilippo, who had been covering the Flyers and was probably the only real name we brought in. And then Kevin Kincaid, who had done some TV production work and a little side blogging, became our head writer. So we pieced together all these guys who didn't really have followings, but they were all really good writers, really passionate about the local teams, and eager, had always wanted to do this. And in the long run, that wound up working out better because we got guys who were just truly devoted to the site, who have gone from part-time freelance to part-time to most of them are now full-time with good careers and benefits doing this. And but it was kind of a ragtag bunch. I remember the day we announced our new team, and all the people in the comments were like, well, I've heard of Anthony, but who the hell is everybody else? And, why should we pay attention to these people? And now for my money, Bob's the best guy on the Phillies beat. Kevin's the best guy on the Sixers beat. Russ and Anthony are it for the Flyers as far as I'm concerned. So, and then we got Phil Kydell and Tim Riley, and, we've had some others, help us out along the way, and it's worked out really well. Sorry, it was a long answer, but it was a really cool ragtag group, and they're all still with us pretty much.
And that's kind of the neat part of doing it, the way you guys did it. And that's why I like reading Crossing Broad more than I like reading other stuff. I mean, I follow all like you said, all the heavy hitters for Eagles, Phillies, Sixers, for quick blurbs here and there on Twitter. They're great because they're getting the first scoop. Right? If I'm going to sit down and read an article, I enjoy reading Crossing Broad because oftentimes it's written the way I would think about the team or the way I thought that game went. And it's because you have guys who were fans first and became writers instead of media personalities who you brought on to be a writer. It feels to me at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Crossing Broad's allegiance is like really to the fan first, and then teams, organizations, partnerships, whatever else. Because you guys were fans when you started writing for it.
Yeah, totally. It's really hard because we have credentials now to most of the games, but our guys do a really nice job of staying the allegiance to the fan. For the longest time, in the beginning, I couldn't get them. We were too snarky and too small, and most of the teams would have laughed at us those first few years. But then as time went on, people would always say to me, like, do you want credentials? Do you go to the games? Do you go to all the games? Right. And I'm like, I live in Horsham and now I'm all the way up by Doylestown. I was like, I'm far. I can't go to every weeknight game, and nor do I want to, because you get there and you kind of have to play the PR game. You get the coach before the game, you get the press release. And, a lot of the writers, the good ones, separate themselves from the herd, but many of the writers just kind of move, and the reporters in a herd. They're all covering the same comments and the same things. And us being able to take a step back and kind of view the TV landscape, the post-game show, the radio aspect, like really bring together the whole ecosystem of being a fan. Being away is actually very helpful from that standpoint. And it's allowed us to keep that fan voice. And I always preach to our guys, Kevin Kincaid goes to most Sixers games, and Bob goes to lots of Phillies games. Anthony and Russ are at almost every Flyers game, or at least they were sort of pre-pandemic. And I'm like, guys, when you're down there, just remember who you're writing for. You're not writing for the PR department or other writers. You're writing for the fan. And honestly, sometimes it's easier to take people that are talented and passionate and turn them into, I'll use journalists in air quotes, but someone covering the team. Because if you find someone who's kind of schooled and has been in the media for a while, they have their processes, and it's almost impossible to break that and have them fit, what our site is.
Yeah, and then you end up sounding like every other site, which, it's hard to compete when you started the way that you started. It's hard to compete with like NBC Sports Philly when they're backed by, a major network and Comcast and all this stuff. You have to kind of exist in a different space. But one huge thing did go your way. It seemed like there was a big turning point when the Eagles went on that Super Bowl run and then inevitably won the Super Bowl. Could that have possibly come at a better time for you guys? Or is that seemed like lightning in a bottle?
Yeah, it was well timed. So that we had raised a little bit of money and brought on our ragtag group that previous September. So September 2017, August, September 2017, we got started. And we basically, since we had wanted to do the subscription model, we figured we're going to have about 6 months of runway to bring people on. And then we're going to get subscriptions, and that'll give us nice recurring revenue. And by the time we get to 6 months, we should be good and breaking even. Well, as I put in the thread, like the subscription thing really didn't work for us because it was all kind of built on the idea that we were going to bring in like these big names. We're going to bring an audience with them. And most of them said no, for better or worse. So we had the ragtag group. We got some subscriptions, but not a ton. It was like, all right, but we got a really talented team. The site is good. The traffic is good. Like, I feel better about the content than ever. So let's just find a business model now. But as we're getting to, January of 2018, we're like 4 or 5 months in, and I'm looking at the revenue, and the revenue is like good. Our ad revenue was picking up. We had some other opportunities, some t-shirts here and there. But I was looking at what we're paying the guys, looking at what we were bringing in, and looking at like kind of the bare minimum I needed to kind of like, pay my bills and stuff. I was like, we're going to be cutting it close. And then, and then Lane Johnson goes and wears the dog mask on TV. And I'm like, thankfully we had set up this t-shirt shop and we were fulfilling all the shirts ourselves. So we had really good profit margins. We'd always been a t-shirt affiliate, but 2 years earlier, my wife left her job. We made the decision that, hey, part of the deal is like, we will actually fulfill and inventory our own shirts, like in the basement. And she was responsible for customer service and sending them out, because you get like twice the margin if you're doing most of the legwork. So, Lane Johnson, so we had this process set up. We were using a Shopify store. Lane Johnson wears the dog mask, instant t-shirt. We sell quite a bit of those. We spend like the next 2 weeks, in the dining room packing shirts. I remember Russ was here helping us. And then obviously the Super Bowl. And I knew like, oh my God, if they win, this is an apparel opportunity. We had all these shirts pre-planned. We had a parade shirt, like a faux trophy shirt on top of City Hall, and they sold okay. But immediately after the game, I posted them, and I could see like they weren't getting the massive traction I had expected. And I was like, okay, we should probably do a shirt on the Philly special. And I just like sketched on a piece of paper the play. I was watching the replay, sketching it out, and then just sent it to our designer. I was like, take this sketch and just put it on a t-shirt. It doesn't need to be fancy. I think it will sell. And then like by the next morning, we sold like $12,000 worth of shirts in like the first 8 minutes. And I was like, okay, we got a winner, you know? And then obviously Jason Kelsey does his speech that Thursday or Friday and at the parade. And, that was another shirt. And that gave us, hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue over like the next month and a half. And it was like, okay, could take a deep breath. It wasn't going to last forever, but it was like, if nothing else, we got a year or two of kind of payroll to make work here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Super Bowl is one thing, and I want to get into that in a second, but just the amount of profitable opportunities that come out of one run. I mean, you got to figure you get Philly, you get the dog masks, and then you get the Hungry Dogs Run Faster, all within about a 4-week span. I mean, you literally would sell out of one design, and then by the time you launch the next one, there's already another like flashpoint moment you got to cover. I mean, I love that team for so many reasons, but I mean, the personalities on that team were probably second to none. That as far as I can remember, at least.
It was, it was wild. I mean, sometimes you do get those, I guess with any championship run, you're going to have these special moments that you can kind of commemorate, but getting something is like an outlier with the dog mask and obviously the speech just created such an opportunity for everybody. And I remember being at the parade and, we were selling a lot of the Philly special shirts all week. And I was on the phone with like our supplier and, how are we going to do this? Right. And we gotta ship these now. And then we had a hotel in the city. And then Kelsey gives a speech. And I remember sprinting back to the hotel, grabbing the laptop. We had the designers guy in Cincinnati, so he probably wasn't watching. I was like, this just happened. And I gave him some ideas for the shirt. I was like, get me something. And by that night we threw something up and, it was by Friday morning, we posted that one. It was crazy. It was crazy. And it was a sigh of relief because it was like, okay, if nothing else, Crossing Broad continues to exist for 2 more years. And we kind of figured out beyond that.
Yeah. If nothing else, we just might become like an apparel company at this point.
It's a totally different thing. I spent the next 6 weeks in my garage stuffing t-shirts, and I had neighborhood hood kids here helping me, high school kids. Some of the guys came up, my wife, like parents, you name it. If I knew them, I called them and they were in my garage putting shirts in envelopes.
Yeah. Obviously, if you want to like read more about the thread, it's all on Twitter. Our page will retweet it so you can check it out. But just even existing just outside of that explanation of itself, Crossing Broad and then your whole story in general, at least to me, kind of hit a bigger theme in that sports in Philly and in the surrounding area is just it's bigger than a game that you go watch. In LA, you have so many other things to do, so you go and watch a game. Miami is similar. Philly, you have so many people like yourself where, I mean, these games are your livelihood, the passion of yourself, Russ, Kevin, everybody else who's there. And a lot of people don't get that. If you're not from around here or if you're not like a diehard Philly fan, we come off a different way. So can you just kind of try to put into words like how sports to you has been bigger than something you go watch or something you watch on TV, like what Philadelphia sports really means to yourself?
Yeah. I mean, to me, and I think, everybody listening and all of our readers and all that, Philly is such a provincial town. Boston's pretty similar. Philly, has just a bigger footprint in terms of the suburbs and the metro area, but maybe not. Boston's got all of New England, but they're very similar in that regard. And people don't leave Philly. People grow up here. It's a legacy thing. You root for the team because you grew up doing it, because they grew up doing it, and your kids and my kids are doing the same. And cities like New York are certainly, there's loyal fans in all cities and especially New York, but there's a lot of transient people and, international people and people from all over the country go to New York to work, and Chicago a little bit the same. And LA is obviously the same. San Fran is Silicon Valley, but Philly is different. And it's a part of people's lives, sports, it's traditions. And it's not just the games are a big part of that. But the example I always use is, whether you like him or hate him, Angelo Cataldi has been doing this forever, right? And he's the morning radio host on WIP. And if you're a Philly sports fan, you have probably almost certainly spent more time listening to Angelo over the course of your life, especially if you had a morning commute at any point, than watching basically any other player who's ever played in Philly. And at the time, like, I'll use Cole Hamels, kind of big name marquee player that was here, won a World Series, was here a long time, kind of came up here. But the average Phillies fan has probably spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of listening to Angelo, and maybe like 20 hours watching Cole Hamels actually throw baseballs, right? So like the media is as much a part of our lives, and the people around sports are as much a part of our lives as the players and teams. That's Ron Jaworski, it's Bernie Perron, it's the media guys, it's the radio folks. So that was a big part of our site, was tapping into that. And we did radio wars, and we covered like the battles between the personalities on the different radio stations. We commented on what was going on the post-game show, because, I realized, and I think our audience appreciated that, anyone who was a true Philly sports fan wasn't just turning the game off. They were consuming everything around it. They were going to the ballpark. They were excited about Dollar Dogs nights and the new beer at Citizens Bank Park, and, Xfinity Live when it got built. We always commented on all that stuff around the game, which I really think helped.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just for myself, like, following on Twitter and all, like, I found myself, like, I'm a diehard Sixers fan. I follow everything in Philadelphia, but everybody has that one sport. And for me, it's basketball. So I'll find myself watching the pregame, the game, the postgame interviews when Doc says something infuriating, the rest of that reaction, and then probably even Sixers outsiders for a while after that. And that's not uncommon. I mean, for fans here, like, you don't just turn the game on or like scroll your phone idly while the game's on. Like, it's a 4-hour viewing experience. And to your point with the radio, I'm personally not a huge fan of WIP. I think sometimes our sports media in Philly is one of our bigger hindrances, but it's an institution. Like you were saying, like, I still listen to it, whether you like it or not. Like, you're going to tune in, you're going to talk to people about, what blasphemous stuff they may have said that morning, that afternoon. And, and that's why they're almost the sixth team in Philly is the media. So and that's what I love about it. As much as I would like to leave Philly at some point, I can't imagine going to another sports town because it would never live up, in my opinion.
It's such a way of life for people. It really is a way of life. It really is. And the media folks are so competitive with each other. I mean, Les Bowen punched Jeff McLean once, 2 Eagles writers down at the practice facility, and they cover it. The Eagles are covered like the White House. They really are. The attitude and demeanor of the reporters in that room with the coach is the same as the reporters talking to the White House press correspondent. It's bizarre. It's bizarre, but it's uniquely Philly and a few other Northeast cities.
And that's the interesting part about it being uniquely Philly. And I'm always brought back to, there's a great clip that came up when Ray Didinger announced his retirement. And it was a video of him. It was during the Super Bowl, and it was him on a panel. And one of the other panelists, whose name, unfortunately, I can't remember, was, taking the easy shot and kind of disparaging Philadelphia fans, for the snowballs at Santa, the booing, and all the cheap shots that you can take. And, on national TV, Didinger took the time out of his day to get vehemently angry, like red in the face, stood up, and just kind of put him back in his place. And that always makes me think, what makes us so uniquely different to where almost no other sports fan base quite understands. Outside of, Buffalo Bills fans are as intense as we are, but I still think that's even a little bit different. Can you pinpoint anything in Philadelphia fandom that makes us so unique from every other sports city that this country has to offer?
Yeah, there really is an underdog mentality, and this will probably speak to your audience, but like Philly is always going to be in the shadow of New York and Washington in some ways, right? You got the nation's capital 2 hours south. You got the greatest city on earth 2 hours north, right? And Philly's kind of stuck in the middle, and it's very provincial, and it doesn't have the big money and development in Wall Street like New York has, and it doesn't have the seat of political power like DC has. Yet the country was founded here, and it's a big market, and it's got great sports teams, and it's got a booming city and business and Comcast. There are big business and opportunity here. But I think just as a town, it's a very blue collar town, so there's an underdog mentality to that, and then people don't leave here. And then we've been stereotyped, in some cases rightly, as gruff, and we are like that. We are, and we have to own that. Town. But we get this bad rap because of it. And then you could look at some truly horrific things that happen in other stadiums. Fan is killed in Kansas City. There's been gang violence outside like Dodgers and Giants games. These things have happened. Over the last 10 years. I remember us blogging them. Like, people have been stabbed outside of games. People have been killed. Like, there have been horrible fights at every NFL stadium and Philly, right?
Yeah.
But anytime the littlest thing happens in Philly, everyone just sort of, gloms onto that stereotype. And I think we get our backs up, and that's where we kind of just get this herd mentality. Like, we're always backed into a corner, and we kind of feel the need to live up to it sometimes and then defend ourselves against it when outsiders call us on it. But the reality is, I'd wager there are less truly horrific sports things that happen here than elsewhere. We just boo a lot, and like, we're hard on players, but it's all like, it's not like actual violence usually.
No, yeah, and even as recently as, I want to say it was a month ago, Yankees fans were throwing trash cans onto the field. It was a news story for about a day.
Right.
You still hear about snowballs at Santa from people who weren't even alive, myself included, when that happens. So, I mean, that's just kind of the hypocrisy of the whole thing.
Yeah, you won't hear, those things don't stick with other teams and cities. I think that's where we get really bothered. It'd be one thing, it sticks with us, but like, it doesn't stick. I can't even recall. I know we've blogged dozens of them over the years, but I can't even recall like a specific incident, because it just kind of comes, and even in my mind, it just washes through, and it never sticks with that team or city the way anything that happens in Philly seems to really stick here.
Exactly. And this I didn't even go over on the rundown, but just the way this has been going, I'm dying to hear your opinion on it. We've been talking about, how it's unique and how it's different, and, the fans are so passionate, and we've recently started putting together like the guys that get it. Like, you can really tell, like, guys that are Philly, they were almost born to play here. If you had to pick one guy to represent the guys who get it club, who would that spokesperson be in your mind?
Man, I mean, there's been a lot over the years. I mean, it depends. Like, we love like, to me, Chase Utley is like my sports hero, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if he necessarily got it. I think I read once that he said like he would prefer to play in front of an empty stadium. He just wants to win the game. He's that competitive. But we like that about him. I think, some of the guys who get it from playing to the crowd standpoint, Bryce Harper gets it. He knows some of these guys. I think he strategically gets it. Like, I'm going to wear the Fanatic socks and the Fanatic spikes, and I'm going to play to the crowd. And he probably has someone encouraging him to do that. I think guys over the years, like Rod Brindamore and Sean Podine, like those sorts of like hard-nosed players, I think we really like. Allen Iverson is obviously one. I mean, there's been a lot over the years, and I think everyone gets it in a slightly different way. Some guys we just love because they're competitive. Some guys like Iverson we love because they're competitive and they wear their heart on the sleeve. And other guys just really play to us really well, and they play hard, and then they play up to it to the fans, and
Yeah.
we're not hard. Like,
Really not.
We're not hard to win over. You could probably say like Bryce Harper probably had like some PR person at some point tell him like, hey, try this. They'll love you. And we do. And it's fine. Like, he does it. He plays hard and he backs it up. That's all it takes.
Yeah, and you got to figure, I mean, we've idolized guys like, I mean, when Dario Saric left, people were genuinely sad. TJ McConnell, like, you don't have to be a superstar to get it. We ask that you give us 100% all the time, because for a lot of people in the stands, that's what they're giving you. I mean, it might be half a week's pay. It might be, not eating out a couple times, come to the game, and you kind of expect that back. I mean, just two names that always come to mind for me is, I think Joel Embiid's done a spectacular job of getting it. I know whenever I go watch him play and like listen to him talk, I know he wants the championship as bad for the Sixers as I do for the Sixers. Jason Kelsey is another like all-timer, like gets it kind of guy. But it really isn't that hard to stick here, I don't think.
Yeah, Embiid's done a nice job. He really has, and he backs it up. He says the right things. He's truly entertaining. It's rare you get a guy who tries as hard, but is also as entertaining. We tend to not love the guys who are kind of like, I don't want to say it's sideshow, but like they have like this, ancillary persona that he's able to tap into so well, but he does both. And so it makes him a true diamond in the rough.
Yeah, he's a star. And we appreciate you coming on as a star in Philadelphia media. I mean, I wish we could talk for an hour, 15, hour 30. But I got to leave a little bit of room for a couple other people to make some money off of the content. But it has been awesome having you on. This has been one of the most entertaining interviews I ever get to have because it's a Philadelphia and New York sports show. I rarely get to do just a full episode on just like the nitty gritty of Philadelphia sports. I really thank you for being a part of it. For all of our listeners, you can check Kyle Scott out on Twitter at Kyle Scott Laskowski or Kyle Scott on Crossing Broad or the co-host at Monetize Media HQ. All can be found on Twitter. Kyle, thanks again for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.